Welcome, everyone. My name is Serge Tomasian. I am the program chair of the World Affairs Council of Orange County. And along with Megan Torre, the CEO of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, we're proud to have today and pleased to have today as our guest speaker, Mr. Brennan, the former director of the CIA, and as well as a moderator, Ms. Janet Napolitano, the former secretary for the Secretary of Homeland Security for the United States. And on behalf of the World Affairs Council, I'd like to introduce now Megan Torre from the World Affairs Council of Connecticut.
Thank you so much, Serge. I have to say we are so delighted to be partnering with the World Affairs Council of Orange County today for this bi-coastal event. We are so happy that we're able to do this. And I'd also like to welcome those joining us from World Affairs Councils around the country. Today's discussion, as we know, is with former director of the CIA, John Brennan, on his new book, Undaunted. And I know everyone joining us today has a copy of the book. And if you haven't read it already, it's a fantastic read. You're going to love it. And we have a very special moderator today, as Serge said, in Janet Napolitano. For those of us joining in the audience, I will just talk you through the format. Secretary Napolitano will, moderate some Q&A with Director Brennan, but we also encourage you to be as interactive as you like. So please, if you want to ask a question, you can use that Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. Please ask a succinct and direct question. And if you want to interact with your fellow attendees from around the country, please use the chat feature, and we really encourage that. Back to you, Serge.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, everybody. We are pleased to have Mr. John Brennan as our guest speaker today, and as well pleased to have Secretary Napolitano serve as the moderator. And I'm not sure whether to call her Governor Napolitano or Secretary, but either one fits well. Let me introduce who the moderator is first. Janet Napolitano is currently a professor of public policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. She served as the 20th president of the University of California, the UC system here in California. It is the nation's largest public research university with 10 campuses throughout the state, 5 medical centers, and 3 affiliated national laboratories, and a statewide agricultural and natural resources program. Prior to joining the University of California, Professor Napolitano, there's another title besides being governor and secretary, served as Secretary of Homeland Security from 2009 to 2013. She is a former 2-term governor of Arizona, a former Attorney General of Arizona, and a former U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. In 2019, Ms. Napolitano published How Safe Are We? Homeland Security Since 9/11. Professor Napolitano earned her BS degree, summa cum laude, in political science from Santa Clara University, and her Juris Doctorate from the University of Virginia. She is currently based in Berkeley, California. Ms. Napolitano, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Serge, and I'm delighted to be here today with my former colleague and good friend, John Brennan, who, as was noted, is the author of a terrific new book, Undaunted, and which is what we're going to be discussing today. John was raised in New Jersey, attended Fordham University, joined the CIA at a variety of positions there. Ultimately became President Obama's first Homeland Security and Counterterrorism advisor in 2009, and then in 2013 became the CIA director, a post that he held until President Trump took office in 2017. So, John, it's good to see you, and congratulations, as we were talking before the program started, on a terrific new book. It's a really good read.
Well, thank you so much, Janet. Thank you for doing this today. I want to express my appreciation to the World Affairs Council, to Serge, Megan, and others. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to interact with you again. As I talked about in the book, you were one of my closest colleagues, especially when I was at the White House. And it was very, very memorable interactions that we had on so many important issues. So it's great to be with you again today.
Thanks. Well, thank you, John. And let's begin at the beginning, shall we? Do you want to briefly describe how you grew up and where, and how the values that you learned as a child informed your later adult life?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey in a average middle-class blue-collar family. My father emigrated to this country when he was 28 years old in 1948. He came from Ireland. And as a young boy, my father impressed upon myself and my sister, my brother, just how special it was to be an American citizen by dint of our birth. He pointed out and could tell his own personal story about how so many people from around the globe really strive to come to America because of the great opportunities that this country presents and because of the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy. And so he told us never to take that for granted. And so growing up in that northern New Jersey household with my mother and father, they really did give me a strong moral grounding that I'd like to think has stayed with me throughout the course of my life and during my government career. A North Star that really emphasized things like honesty and integrity and public service. And I ultimately was able to work in the government, but those early years I think are so formative. And I was very, very honored, lucky, and privileged to have a family, a community environment that really did try to reinforce the feeling I had that it was special to be an American, and I needed to try to use the opportunities I had in order to contribute to this great country.
You know, you joined the CIA as a young adult right out of college, it seems. But you gradually rose through a variety of different positions and ended up working for both President Bush's, President Clinton, and President Obama. Can you share with us what working for each of them was like, what their personalities were like, how they interacted with the intel community, and perhaps as a feature of that, describe the discipline of the president's daily brief and being the briefer?
Well, I served for 6 presidents, starting out with Jimmy Carter, the remaining months of his administration, but I never got to meet Jimmy Carter when he was president, nor Ronald Reagan during his term of office. But it was George H.W. Bush who was the president when I had my first opportunity to go to the Oval Office and actually sit down with a sitting president. And I must tell you, it was a very intimidating and humbling experience. I talk about it in the memoir because George H.W. Bush had been vice president for 8 years, was president, was the former director of CIA. He knew national security and intelligence exceptionally well. And so as a relatively young CIA officer, I was rather, frightened when I went into that Oval Office, but he was so personable and so welcoming, as well as so solicitous of my views about what might happen. This was at the time when Iraq had invaded Kuwait. What might happen if the United States joined with other countries to militarily push Iraq out of Kuwait? And so it was a very good feeling I had during that first Oval Office visit. And then I was able to, during President Clinton's presidency, be his daily intelligence briefer for the PDB, as you mentioned, the President's Daily Brief, which is the document that is produced 6 days a week and delivered to the president, vice president, and the senior members of the national security team. And so I had to prepare every morning. I would get to CIA headquarters around 2:30 or so and comb through all of the information that had come in overnight, read the articles that were included in that document, which was about 7 or 8 pages or so, and also read all the sources that undergirded those articles. And President Clinton had an amazing ability to absorb information, to process it, and then also tremendous powers of recall. And it was, again, intimidating to have to present the intelligence community's best intelligence and analysis to the President of the United States every morning. And so it was something that allowed me to expand my range of expertise or area of focus because until then I had worked on the Middle East and South Asia and counterterrorism. But when you're the president's daily briefer, you have to be ready to talk about Russia, China, proliferation, terrorism, you name it. And so it really did broaden my appreciation for just the extent of the national security challenges this country faces. I worked in the George W. Bush administration, and although I had some serious disagreements with some of those policy decisions that he made, such as the invasion of Iraq, I must say that I very much respected the seriousness with which he approached his job. And he was keenly interested in not just reading the PDB, but he also enjoyed having CIA and other intelligence professionals go down to the White House and sit with them and talk about issues. Analysts, operations officers, individuals who had served overseas and had just come back. He really liked to get down into the weeds to understand some of the details of these issues. And so he was an avid consumer of intelligence and really admired and respected it. Again, notwithstanding my differences of view on some of his policy choices, he really, I think, tried to do what he thought was in the best interest of this country. And then obviously I got to know President Obama best, having served in his administration for those 8 years. Those first 4 years, you know well, because we used to meet in my office, which was, on the ground floor of the West Wing with the low ceiling.
It was like a cave.
It was, especially with the rodents running through the walls.
Everybody thinks of the White House as this, glorious structure, but it's a rabbit's warren down there.
It was. Now it's location, location, location. So I was located virtually right below the Oval Office. So I would go up and down the stairs to the Oval Office several times a day, if not more. And I really had the opportunity to get to know the president as a person, how he absorbed information. He was somebody who would be a voracious reader of information and memos that were prepared, intelligence assessments. Janet, when he would come to one of our meetings in the Situation Room, he was, usually the best prepared person in the room because he got so much information, would read it. He'd be up late at night, early in the morning. And so when he came to a meeting, he already was, well informed, but yet he was still very interested in what others thought. He would frequently go around the table. And even if you didn't offer your views, he would call upon you because he really tried to understand the range of perspectives as well as the range of considerations that he had to take into account on policy issues. But also one of the things that I point out in the book is that President Obama had a really almost uncanny knack to, I'm sure he's a great chess player, because he would be able to look ahead 2, 3, and 4 moves in terms of trying to understand the implications of certain policy decisions, but also could see the relationships between, like a multi-dimensional chessboard. If you move your chess piece on one board, it affects your position on the other. And that's why President Obama really had that ability, I think, to incorporate information, assessments, intelligence into that broader perspective of how U.S. policy interests and national security interests really are intertwined, and making a decision in one realm really affects our equities in another.
One of the signature moments during President Obama's presidency, of course, was the killing of Osama bin Laden and that entire operation. And you spend a good chapter of the book talking about that. But can you describe the status of the intel that we possess regarding bin Laden's location and how that had been ascertained, and maybe give us a flavor for how the process went from initial intel reports to the go decision by the president?
All right. Well, after 9/11, I think CIA in particular felt a great responsibility and obligation to the American people to find bin Laden and to bring him to justice, because I think there was a lot of regret within CIA that they weren't able to stop those horrific attacks that took place. So it was a tedious effort that many CIA officers and others tried to piece together those dots of intelligence over the course of the next decade. And it took a decade before the CIA was able to acquire some intelligence about an individual who was believed to be one of the carriers that bin Laden had used. And so it was in the fall timeframe, in September, when Leon Panetta came down to the White House and told us that the CIA thinks that they were able to find that person and had traced him to Abbottabad, a city in Pakistan. And Leon was, I think, very correct in not trying to heighten expectations too much, but wanted to let President Obama know that if indeed this was the carrier, this might lead us, in fact, to bin Laden. Well, in the subsequent months, the agency, along with others, were able to look at the compound from a distance or clandestinely, and came to see that there was an individual living at this compound who never seemed to leave, and also would take daily walks in the interior garden behind the high walls. And that chapter in my book is called The Pacer, because that's what we called him. But the intelligence was fragmentary, and we didn't have a good sense of who it was. We thought it was probably an Al-Qaeda member, and it appeared at least that this individual who was pacing in the garden fit the general description of bin Laden. He seemed to be a tall person. And so as we developed that intelligence, President Obama and others were told that we don't know how long bin Laden has been there. We don't know how long he's going to stay there, because Al-Qaeda leaders would move about for their own security purposes. And so President Obama, in the December-January timeframe, told us to work with the intelligence community and the military to try to develop some options that if it was bin Laden, we could implement those options. And so a number of options were teed up, including sending some missiles into that compound, which had the benefit of not putting US lives at risk. But the downsides were that we wouldn't know whether or not the person at the compound that we killed was bin Laden, nor would we be able to access all the documents and computers and other types of things that were there. And we would wind up killing probably dozens, if not more, other individuals. And we knew that women and children lived at the compound. So that was dismissed as an option. And so ultimately we came up, or the US military, Bill McRaven, came up with the option of a helicopter assault raid, the types of raids that the US military had been doing for a number of years in Afghanistan. Now in Afghanistan, the US military sort of owns the skies there. That's not the case in Pakistan. So it was decided that this was going to be a unilateral operation and that we weren't going to inform the Pakistanis in advance, because we didn't know whether or not bin Laden was there and being given the protection of the Pakistani government. We also didn't know, even if he wasn't given that protection, whether or not information might leak out from the Pakistanis that would lead to bin Laden leaving the compound. And so then came up with the option of, again, the helicopter assault raid. It had to be done during the lunar cycle because we wanted to keep the light as limited as possible, because the helicopters would have to fly for about 90 minutes into Abbottabad, and then would have to go back out after the raid. And fortunately, that was the option that was approved by the president. But at that time, people were coming up with all different percentages about whether the intelligence indicated it was 70% certain that he was there, or 40%, or 30%. And President Obama said at one meeting, I remember, it's 50-50. He's either there or he's not there. But he said, even if it's only 30%, it's 30% more than we've ever had before. And the American people deserve to have justice for that horrific attack that took 3,000 lives. And as we all know, the operation was approved. It was carried out flawlessly, despite the fact that one of those helicopters of the raid was pulled down because of the air vortex of the compound. But as the US military, the best in the world, always does, they have contingency plans, and plan B, plan C, and they seamlessly moved into plan B. And it was very successful, and thankfully, none of those special forces were injured or killed.
John, as over the months where the intel was being gathered and ultimately to the president's final decision, what was your assessment of the intel? Would you have made the same decision?
Yeah, I would have. I had worked counterterrorism for many years. I was involved in the pursuit for bin Laden even before the 9/11 attacks when I was stationed in Saudi Arabia in the late 90s. And so I was keeping very much abreast of the nuggets of intelligence that the CIA and others were acquiring. I put a lot of stock in the CIA experts, the Al-Qaeda experts, who had been working this issue for 10, 20 years. And so when they came into the White House Situation Room and spoke about their confidence level, and there were really no countervailing indicators that it wasn't bin Laden, I put a lot of stock in that. And so my advice to the president, both during the final National Security Council meeting, as well as when we gathered Tom Donilon, myself, Dennis McDonough, and Bill Daley with the president on the Friday before the raid, I said it's a go from my perspective that there was enough intelligence to move forward with confidence with authorizing that raid.
And what about relations with the Pakistanis? You've mentioned that it was unilateral, that information was not shared with them. What was their reaction?
I talk about the raid and then the aftermath of the raid. And the first action that needed to be taken, once we were confident that the helicopters and our special forces were able to get back to Afghanistan safely and they had bin Laden's remains, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mike Mullen, it was his job to call his Pakistani counterpart, General Kayani, to explain exactly what was happening in Abbottabad, because by then the Pakistanis already knew something was going on.
There were a bunch of helicopters landing there, and shots being fired.
There was a firefight going on in Abbottabad, and their air defense systems were lighting up because these helicopters were going across their country. They had scrambled some jets and other things. And so Mike Mullen explained to Kayani what went down, that we thought that we had gotten bin Laden, and then also explained to Kayani that the sensitivity of the operation really required us to carry this out unilaterally. Kayani expressed, concern that this was being done in Pakistani territory, but he also expressed understanding as to the motivation and why, and also said that he very much hoped that bin Laden was brought to justice. I also recount that my job was to reach out to my Saudi counterpart, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, who was the Minister of Interior, very close counterterrorism partner, and tell Prince Mohammed that we had bin Laden, we had his remains. He was a Saudi citizen, although the Saudis had revoked his citizenship, but that I wanted to, on behalf of President Obama, give the Saudis the opportunity to decide whether they wanted the remains back, or that we would take care of them consistent with Islamic law in terms of the disposition of the remains. I anticipated that Prince Mohammed would say, no, you keep those remains. And exactly,
we don't want them.
exactly what he did, because there would be no real benefit to the Saudis in terms of taking them. So the aftermath, there was a sequencing of things. President Obama also called President Bush and President Clinton. He also reached out to members of Congress. So it was shortly before midnight when President Obama delivered the address to the nation and the world that finally bin Laden was brought to justice.
Yeah, I remember that moment and the spontaneous celebration that occurred outside the White House. You describe it in your book too.
Right, because when I left the West Wing, it was after midnight, and as I approached the door, I could see that it was lighter than usual outside. And then I heard this, din of noise. And as I opened up, Lafayette Park, which is right next to the White House, was lighted. And it was also, there was a lot of cheering, USA, USA, CIA, CIA. People were coming out, they were blowing horns, and there was a real celebratory mood, which, as you know, and as I recount in the book, when we were huddled together in the White House and watching this operation unfold, when we knew that we got bin Laden, there were no high fives or celebrations or applause. There was more or less a very solemn recognition that we happened to be the stewards of, the responsibility of the American government to, again, bring justice to bin Laden. And we were just very, very admiring of the great work that was done by the intelligence professionals, by the military operators, and how it really was a team effort. But when I was starting to go home that night or early the next morning, and hearing those chants and the crowd, and seeing that, it was the first time that day that I got emotional, because it just made me feel so honored and privileged to be part of this effort that, again, did bring justice to the bin Laden on behalf of the families and of the victims of the 9/11 attack.
You know, you mentioned that you called Mohammed bin Nayef, MBN, as he was known, to let him know about the raid. And it reminds me that you really began your career in the CIA as a analyst and officer with Saudi Arabia. You speak Arabic, and you lived in Saudi Arabia for several years. Give us your assessment about what it was like then with Saudi Arabia versus, say, what it is like now with Mohammed bin Salman, and in the tensions maybe that have occurred with respect to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah, well, I had the opportunity. Total of 5 years in Saudi Arabia. Can you hear me, Janet? I just got.
Yeah, I can hear you. There was a weird buzz there, so. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Janet, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can? Okay. I had the opportunity to spend 5 years in Saudi Arabia over the course of 2 tours, first in the early 80s and then in the late 1990s. And it was a fascinating period of time in my life. Back then in the early 80s, I was able to travel throughout Saudi Arabia and the kingdom. I camped out with the tribes. I went down to the border of Yemen, and there was very much of a welcoming environment in those tribes. Whenever they learned that I was an American, they really admired the fact that, you know, Americans were going to their kingdom to learn more about their society and their culture. When I went back in the late 90s, it was a much different attitude, because there was more radicalism, extremism that had taken root. And so I didn't have the same feelings of safety and security when I went there. And unfortunately, because bin Laden was able to tap into a lot of that growing extremism sentiment in Saudi Arabia, he was able then to carry out, again, a series of horrific attacks. So thinking about it now, and what happened, as you pointed out, with the horrific murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, it is quite unfortunate that our government has not tried to hold Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis to greater account, because, at least by the press reports, the CIA had determined with moderate confidence that Mohammed bin Salman bore responsibility for that murder. And it certainly is based on my experience of living and working in Saudi Arabia and working with the Saudis, that it has been my understanding that that type of activity, that murder, could not have happened without the approval, the authorization at the highest levels of government. And so Mohammed bin Salman has brought some reforms to the kingdom, which are good. You know, he has encouraged greater openness of in the society. He has instituted some reforms, but also he is somebody who does not brook any political opposition. He has taken strong actions against political activists. He's incarcerated many, and the reports of broad maltreatment, including of women female activists who are seeking even greater reforms of the Saudi system and society. So I do think it is a very mixed bag with Mohammed bin Salman. The relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia is a critically important one, and we need to be able to continue to have good relations with them. But I do hope that we are going to fulfill our traditional global leadership role in terms of speaking out against these types of atrocities.
You took over.
Janet, I'm going to have to. I can't hear you, and I'm going to see if I can fix this right now. It should take me just one moment. I don't know why. Can you talk, Janet?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can't hear you now. Fine, perfect. Great.
Okay, great. You took over as the CIA director in 2013, and you describe in your book some of the organizational changes you took at the agency. Can you kind of discuss what some of those were and why you made them?
Sure. I do want to mention one thing when I was still at the White House that you didn't talk about, because I talk in the book about our breakfasts that we used to have at the diner. That was the name of it in Adams Morgan, when you were the Secretary of Homeland Security and I was the President's Homeland Security Advisor. And they were wonderful exchanges that we would have as we would go through our scrambled eggs and omelets and hash browns. But I just want to point out that those types of interactions among senior government officials are so critical, because as we well know, the US government is so large and complicated and in many respects unwieldy. And if you have officials operating almost independently of one another, when their portfolios overlap, you're going to, really have problems. And I just wanted to say thank you to you. I said thank you then for taking time to be able to sit down with me and go over. We both had our list of issues and items to go through. And I really felt that we were able to resolve any differences, but also to better coordinate, collaborate, and integrate our efforts for the good of the American people.
So. Well, thanks. And those were fun breakfasts too. We were usually the only people in the diner because we got there really early in the morning. And you describe in your book how the two of us would be in there and my Secret Service detail would be lurking. So
it was one of my more memorable, periods of time at the White House.
Yeah.
But you asked about the CIA. What was the question again?
Yeah. Well, the question with the CIA is you finally become director of the CIA in 2013, and and you undertook some organizational changes. You want to describe what those were and why you made them?
Yeah, I had worked at the CIA for 25 years, from 1980 to 2005. I worked in operations and analysis and management. I did a lot of different things. So I felt as though I knew the agency well. And so when I had the great honor of going back to CIA in 2013, I knew that the agency by that time already was 65, 66 years old, and its organizational structure continued to remain basically the same as when it was stood up in 1947. I had always been a great admirer of what the Department of Defense did as a result of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which was to better integrate the military services, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force, so that overseas you would have a unified chain of command under a combatant commander. And so I thought that integration model was really a very powerful one, which is also what I did when I was asked to help stand up the National Counterterrorism Center, bring together the folks from CIA, FBI, NSA, and Department of Homeland Security. So when I went back to CIA in 2013, I had that in mind in terms of a better integration model, because the CIA had, I refer to them as stovepipes, maybe some people refer to them as cylinders of excellence, operations, analysis, science, technology, and support. And I wanted to position the agency to deal with the challenges of the future. And having the experience before about the power of integration and a matrix model, which is called in terms of organizational speak, that I then initiated a review group that came back to me with some options. And I told them, I said, if you tell me that the CIA is organized exactly correctly, you're going to have a real tough time convincing me that that organizational model is going to be the best one for the future. So we decided to create mission centers, as they're called, just like, the US military has European Command and Africa Command and so on. We had 6 regional mission centers and 4 functional mission centers, such as counterintelligence, counterterrorism, weapons proliferation, and so on. And I put people in charge of those mission centers and incorporated and integrated the capabilities from across the wide expanse of capabilities and authorities and expertise in CIA. And so despite the fact that I had a lot of detractors on it, understandably, because as you well know, you were there at Department of Homeland Security, and talk about a big, complex organization. They tend to be resistant to change.
You've got to really drive it.
You really do. And so I decided that I was going to drive it because I felt that my responsibility was to leave the agency a little better, in a little better position to deal with the future than when I found it. Each director or each secretary or department head should be doing that. And so thankfully, despite some of the naysayers, including Mike Pompeo, who was on the Intelligence Oversight Committee at the time when I was director, who vowed to change it back to the old system, that mission center construct has prevailed. And I do think the integration model, as again, the US government gets bigger and more diverse and more capable, we need to find ways to integrate capabilities so that we optimize the outcomes that we're going after.
We can't end this part of the program without discussing, at least for a few minutes, your assessment about where the intelligence community stands now, particularly the CIA. You talk about this in the closing chapters of your book, but the politicization of intel. Give us a full Brennan here.
You have read the book, because that's what my staff used to say, the full Brennan, when I really tell people what I think of them. One of the real attractions of the intelligence community that brought me to the CIA and kept me there for so many years was that intelligence is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's supposed to be colorblind when it comes to political parties of either side. And I always strove during my career to call balls and strikes as I saw them. I say in the book that I was an equal opportunity offender during my years. And during the Obama administration, it was mostly the Democrats in Congress that were calling for my firing or resignation. And now I seem to be, I'm being pilloried because people think I am a Democratic partisan, while I'm not. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. And so what I have really been concerned about is the politicization of intelligence, the politicization of law enforcement, the politicization of our judicial system, because these are the institutions of government that really are supposed to be outside of the realm of politics. They're supposed to be carrying out their duties consistent with their constitutional oaths. And I've been very concerned as I've heard people, including Donald Trump, denigrate the output, the assessments of the intelligence community, the profession, the people of it, and the politicization of intelligence itself. And quite unfortunately, we have somebody who's the director of national intelligence today, John Ratcliffe, who I think has badly, badly tarnished the image of that independence and nonpartisanship of the intelligence community by very selectively releasing, in a politically motivated way, intelligence. And so I am concerned about the impact on the professionals, whether it be in the FBI or CIA or NSA or wherever, because it tends to be demoralizing. Now, I'm confident that my former colleagues are continuing to stay focused on the mission, whether they are serving overseas or here in the States. But I must tell you, if the first customer not only does not value their output and their intelligence, but also tends to trash what they're doing, to me, that sends a very, very bad signal to the current employees, to the families of the current employees, who are the ones that have to keep the home fires burning when their loved ones have to go off at a moment's notice, overseas or somewhere else to try to keep this country safe. And it sends a very bad signal to those young Americans who are considering going into the intelligence profession or law enforcement or the diplomatic corps. And so just like you, Janet, I spent a lot of time talking to college and university students, encouraging them to disregard all that political craziness that's going on in Washington now, that this country needs the best and brightest among us in order to deal with the challenges that we face ahead that range from proliferation to terrorism, to climate change, to all of those issues that really are going to affect the next generations of Americans. And so it really, I think, I tend to do the full Brennan, including sometimes on Twitter, I will acknowledge, when I feel as though individuals in positions of responsibility are abusing and misusing their authorities, their platforms, and are spewing disinformation, basically, to the American public. And so on behalf of my fellow colleagues, I guess that's why I have spoken out. And as you know, I speak in my last chapter in the beginning that I am undaunted. I'm not going to be quieted because people think that a former CIA director shouldn't be speaking out. Well, for 33 years, I tried to defend the freedom of speech of every American private citizen. And as a private citizen now, maybe I'm just enjoying the
First Amendment.
Yes, right, exactly, yes.
Well, I think I'm going to ask one last question before we turn it over to the audience. And that is, John, if you had to list one highlight in your memoir, one moment in your career that made you so glad you were there when you were there doing what you were doing, what would it be?
Well, I guess there are several. I mentioned about the Bin Laden raid that night, that I just felt so privileged to be a part of that effort. When I had the opportunity to raise my right hand and put my left hand on a copy of the Constitution, I'll come back to that in a minute, and be sworn in as the director of CIA, having worked there for 25 years, starting off as a GS9, and by happenstance and being in the right place at the right time and having people who really took a chance on me and mentored me and guided me, the fact that I was able to lead the courageous and patriotic women and men of CIA as the director, it really was quite a moving and profound moment in my life. I said I would come back to the issue of the Constitution because when I was confirmed by the Senate, and even a day or two before, I said, if I'm confirmed, I want to put my hand on something, other than the Bible, because I wanted to be able to signal that I was determined to ensure that as CIA director, I am committed to following the rule of law of this great country of ours. And so my staff reached out to the National Archives, and they found a draft of the Constitution that had George Washington's personal edits on it. It was an amazing document. And so they asked the National Archives if they could bring that over. And sure enough, that morning, guards came over with the person from the National Archives and delivered it. And I had it, put my left hand on it and swore an oath of allegiance. And then the White House spokesperson talked about that I did that on that document as a way to signal my dedication and adherence to the rule of law. Well, sure enough, some of my detractors pointed out that it was a draft of the Constitution. It didn't have the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights on it. And therefore, this was my way to say that I'm not going to honor those Bill of Rights. But, you can't explain the knuckleheads that are out there. But that was a moment that was quite moving. And my wife and two of my children were there with me. It was a real seminal moment in my professional career.
Great. And I think we all should be grateful for the years you've spent in the public service, and to your family for your supporting you during those years. You talk a lot in the book about the hours that being in the roles that you had, take away from family life, and they supported you all the way. So that's
well, Janet, also I remember those first couple of years in the Obama White House when we were hit with the H1N1 pandemic in April of 2009. We hit with the Gulf oil spill. We were hit with hurricanes, one after another. And you always seem to be, the person that the president would look to be able to try to orchestrate all of the capabilities in the U.S. government. And I must say, you did a tremendous job in not trying to dominate, what was happening, but to be that orchestrator, which is so important. But those are really difficult shoals, and we were new to the federal government in that capacity. But working with people like you, Kathleen Sebelius as Health and Human Services, Tony Fauci and others, it really shows that what professionals can do if they really try to work together. And as I talk in the book, I really felt privileged that President Obama and Vice President Biden always wanted us to be open and honest with the American people. And also for the H1N1 pandemic, let the science, let the medical experts, let the data drive our policy decisions. And it was very complicated, but that also was one of the real eye-opening experiences for me. And it was again, it was a pleasure and honor to work with you.
Yeah, likewise, John. It's a terrific book, everybody. I highly recommend it. I'm going to open it up to the question and answer portion of the program. Rick?
Thank you, Secretary Napolitano and Director Brennan. It's a privilege to be with you today. I'm going to read directly from some of the questions from the audience, and one certainly relates to a current issue, and that has to do with the U.S. being involved in, so to speak, in forever wars. So, Director, with your experience, what perhaps should we have done differently in Iraq and Afghanistan and the Mideast to prevent our continued presence there, and to prevent the same thing moving forward? And I guess I would add to that, has there been a shift now in the long-standing U.S. doctrine of spreading democracy and not nation building, but certainly, allowing a fertile ground for democracy to sprout, or is there been a real shift? And how do we prevent forever wars?
Well, I think we could have prevented, the Iraq War by not invading Iraq. I think it was misguided. There was not a basis to do it. Clearly, the intelligence was flawed. But also there were a number of individuals in the Bush administration who had a preconceived determination to invade Iraq, and they were trying to marshal the arguments for it. So we should never have been in there. I do talk in the book that I think that the withdrawal of U.S. troops in 2012 facilitated, I think, some of the collapse of the Iraqi military and security services, which allowed ISIS to grow. So, once a decision is made to go in to a country with military forces, you really have to be thinking about how you're best going to be able to extricate yourself from that and do it in a manner that's not going to be even more disruptive. Afghanistan, obviously, it was a different reason for going into Afghanistan, because we were trying to rid Afghanistan of Al-Qaeda. Now, I do think that over the years and over the course of several administrations, there's been different goals and objectives. As you point out, is it nation building? Is it trying to bring these countries, these governments along the path of democratization? I think one of the things that President Obama realized is that there are great limits to America's power overseas in terms of shaping governments, shaping societies. And so I do think that the United States has a very important role to play on that global stage in terms of advocating for political reforms, greater democratic reforms. But we have to be very careful about believing that we can impose our will. And just because we have the military ability to vanquish adversaries, it's much more difficult, far, far more difficult to rebuild countries or rebuild societies or governments after a military conflict.
Thank you. And perhaps in a little more detail to that same vein, the de-Baathification of the Iraqi government after the U.S. invasion turned out to be, a bit troublesome for that country and region. And looking back specifically to that issue, what do you think could have been a better course of action there?
Well, I think the de-Baathification was a bad mistake, because there were a lot of people who were in the Ba'ath Party, including the Iraqi military, that were doing it because they had no choice. Saddam Hussein was a ruthless, bloodthirsty, authoritarian leader. And once Saddam was toppled, it didn't mean that all the people that were part of that Ba'ath Party structure were real advocates and admirers of Saddam Hussein. And I think we should have had a more thoughtful approach and careful approach in terms of trying to ensure that there would be some type of stability in Iraq, as opposed to just totally removing the Ba'ath Party members and basically, disassembling a lot of those government structures and military and having to start from scratch. And so again, I just think that there was a rush to tarnish everybody who had an affiliation with Saddam Hussein. And the world is more complicated than that.
The baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yes.
Also in the Middle East, and an issue that's become very much covered up in the current issues of the day, notwithstanding, of course, the pandemic, is the controversy around, interrogation techniques and that whole program and the controversy surrounding that. We haven't heard very much about that recently. Can you perhaps bring us up to date as to the thinking of the U.S. intelligence community on that sensitive topic?
Well, when I was director of CIA, I vowed that the detention interrogation program that CIA was authorized to implement would never be carried out, at least under my watch. I do not believe it has been reconstituted. I'm certainly hoping not. I don't know what other types of covert action programs might have been initiated during the Trump administration. But I do think that in the aftermath of 9/11, there was a real effort on the part of the Bush administration to prevent the follow-on al-Qaeda attacks. And it was feeling that it was an existential threat, since al-Qaeda was exploring nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons to use in future attacks. But I do think it has hurt us. I would hope that CIA would never again get involved in a program like that. It was not something that the CIA had any experience in. The U.S. military has experience of detaining individuals who were captured in the field of battle. The U.S. military and the FBI have a history and experience in interrogating and debriefing individuals. The CIA didn't have experience in either one. And I do think it has continued to hurt us. And Janet, I remember when you would travel overseas and try to get foreign countries to cooperate with us and reach agreements in terms of, for example, travelers going back and forth. I think there was still remnants of that distaste that a lot of people had in their mouth for some of these CIA and other activities. Do you not agree?
Oh, yes, it came up not infrequently. It really became a stain on the United States.
Yeah.
Thank you. Director Brennan, can you tell us a story that you are particularly proud of the inner workings of the folks, the hidden work of the folks within the CIA? We've heard so much of, overlapping portfolios and internal conflicts, to the point where we had a webinar almost focused on that by one speaker, in terms of the difficulty of getting the NIA, the CIA, and different intelligence agencies to work together. So enough of that in a way, but tell us an anecdote or two about the wonderful work that some of the people we never hear from had completed or advanced during your tenure.
Yeah, I mean, most of those anecdotes and stories are shrouded in secrecy and classification obligations on my part. But I must say that when I became director, and I served as chief of staff to George Tenet when he was director as well, I had full visibility into the range of things that CIA officers were involved in, and including some of the very, very cunning and courageous efforts that CIA officers undertook in denied areas, in countries where if the CIA officers were found out and uncovered, they would have been imprisoned, tortured, or even killed. But they, with great skill and determination and courage, they were able to operate in Russia, in other countries around the world, and do it in a way that they were able to then obtain critical intelligence that we needed in order to better understand our adversaries' weapon systems, or what their plans are, or how they were trying to undermine us. The ability for CIA and other officers to develop these very exquisite technical collection systems so that we would be able to have ears and eyes in places where our people could not go to. And, unfortunately, so many of those stories that I wish I could tell, that I was privileged to hear and even to authorize some of them, they really are eye-watering in many respects. And so I guess I just want to say that, there's a lot of misrepresentation and mischaracterization of what CIA officers do. And they're not perfect. And I frequently had my fights with CIA officers if I felt that they were not living up to their obligations and oath of office. But the overwhelming majority of those officers, women and men, do things on behalf of their fellow citizens. And so whenever you hear these stories and the words, the denigrating words that are leveled at them, just remember that there is so much going on around the world that is keeping us safe and our children and grandchildren safe. And it's because of the courage and the skill and the cunning and the guile of your fellow citizens.
Thank you. I'll finish with one question that has a recurring theme, certainly, in the questions that have been submitted, and that is, and I know we can think of a number of perhaps domestic threats today, but of all the major security and intelligence issues that are out there internationally, what is the one that really gives you most pause and keeps you up at night in terms of a global intelligence threat to the U.S.?
I only have one. Usually when people ask me, what keeps me up at night, I either say spicy Mexican food or dark chocolate. That keeps me up. And disunity at home, the polarization that we are experiencing right now, that has, I think, really corroded a lot of what the United States stands for and what we need to do, both domestically here, to address some outstanding issues and challenges, but also to fulfill our global leadership role. And living very close to Washington, D.C., and being part of that, Washington environment, I really lament that we are not able to bring ourselves together. We're going to have policy differences, absolutely. But I have been most disappointed by the words that are coming out of the highest levels of our government that are fueling this disunity, this dissension, the social tensions that we're feeling right now. But then when I look over the horizon, the United States has a very unique global role, and we have global responsibilities. And Janet knows this well, from the standpoint of the digital environment, cybersphere, and how we are really dependent on the reliability, the health, and the security of that environment. I don't think we as a government, as a society, really have come to grips with what we need to do to bring the private sector and the government together to make that an environment that is going to continue to be the engine of economic growth and prosperity and security and freedom of information. And then climate change, as I continue to look at what's happening here in our country as a result of climate change, but then also around the globe, and how the seas are rising and they're reclaiming coastal communities. And it's leading to the migration of peoples to cities as well as across borders. It's going to have reverberations on the social front, on the economic front, on the political front. And I think if we don't tackle it in a more serious and aggressive way, it's going to be very difficult for us in the years ahead to stop that march toward climate change, much less reverse it.
Excellent, thank you. Well, as we're about 3 minutes to the hour and still on time, I'm going to switch it back over to our chair, Nora Valenzuela, to close things out. But I want to thank you very much, you both, for your time today.
You bet.
Nora?
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Madam Secretary, Director Brennan. We truly appreciate your time and the knowledge that you share with us. I am passionately focused on having intelligent community remaining non-partisan and non-political, because our relationship with the world is not based on a political term of 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years, but rather a long history of alliances and friendships. So thank you for that and acknowledging that. I also wish to thank our 9 partnering councils who joined us today, and also the academic institution, UC Berkeley and UC San Diego, for sharing of their interest with our organization. We thank all of our participants, members, and we actually had members from all over US joining us, so that was exciting to have our guests. As a nonpartisan organization, World Affairs Council focuses on educating the public, and our board members are appointed by the Board of Trustees, and they actually are starting a new term in October. We thank you, and we wish, Director, that you would join us when we can have in-person events, and also Madam Secretary. So we would have the pleasure of doing our tradition of, by now I would be buying you a glass of red wine and presenting you an award on behalf of World Affairs Council. So with that, I thank you. I thank Rick and also Serge and all of our staff and alliances, and wish everyone a happy and safe afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Janet. Good to see you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Nora.
Here.